What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive. And we are here the week after Easter. I guess it's still Easter season.
Easter tide is what they call it officially, yeah.
But we are starting a whole brand new series. We're done with the witnessing at the cross, and we're jumping straight into Revelation.
Yes.
And you've kind of titled this series, the whole series, The Seven, talking about the seven churches referenced. Right. But I'm excited to get into it. You brought up some stuff this morning. I was even like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like, that I was not sure about. So,
nice. Okay.
Not that I questioned, but more like,
yeah.
I was like, that brings some clarity to it. So,
cool.
Let's get into it. Well, Dave, we've kind of been talking on and off all morning about the sports that are happening right now. We're kind of getting some championship games after some crazy March Madness.
I was thinking about that, we talk a lot about sports, right? Reference to that because we both are such fans.
Right.
But, you hit this time period, like right after football's over, and it seems like it's a drought of sports, and like suddenly we're in a great season for sports right now.
Absolutely.
And, even in golf, the Masters is coming up. I mean, it's a great time to be a sports fan.
And, there's definitely like two peak times of the year where it's like there's almost too much sports. But right now it's a really good time because you got some like really high level championship play. And, for me, I'm a big baseball guy. So baseball really kind of ramping up and stuff. So
it's a good time.
Just a lot of fun. It's nice to have some stuff on in the background or being really attentive to it, that stuff. So, well, let's jump into it, Dave. Let's kind of really hit in this Revelation stuff. And one thing, if I could actually start, if you haven't watched Dave's sermon, go back and watch it. It's on the YouTube, it's on the Facebook, all that stuff. And, as you are talking about how people kind of start to like figure out what Revelation, I just had that picture that you see on a lot of like TV shows where people are grabbing that red yarn and going from pen to pen and be like, well, if it all meets here.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. And so I started actually, and I just kind of came across this because I was watching this documentary on the song American Pie.
Yeah.
And so I used that to start the service because, first of all, it's a song that everybody knows and loves, at least the chorus. I mean, you just go. I remember when I was playing in the bands a lot. If you wanted to get the crowd involved, you pull out American Pie. Now, people may not know the verses, but everybody will sing along with the chorus. It's sort of like Country Roads or Sweet Caroline. But, people will jump into that. So it was fun to get the congregation to sing that a little bit. But it does have a lot of really weird lyrics in it.
It
seems very esoteric at the time. Helter Skelter in the summer swelter.
Yeah.
The birds flew off with a fallout shelter, 8 miles down and, 8 miles from falling fast or whatever. So it to your generation, and really I was kind of the end. I think I was like 7 years old when that song came out. But it did mean something. And the symbolism was there to that generation. They understood.
Yeah.
Or if they didn't understand, they would say, what's he talking about? And they was going, he's talking about Bob Dylan, or he's talking about this, whatever. So it was kind of fun, but I thought it was also a really good illustration because we as human beings like to make stuff about us. And the way that Revelation has been interpreted, wrongly interpreted, it has been to make it about current events now.
Yeah.
And every generation has done it. Well, this is predicting that. But Revelation, and I think it's very important to lay the foundation, it's an actual literal 7 churches that he's writing to with a specific message, using illustrations, using it in crazy language and apocalyptic language that they would have understood.
Right.
Or at least had a really good idea what he was talking about, and it would have brought them comfort and encouragement and hope during this time in the Roman emperor.
And a lot of times we like really approach the book of Revelation with fear and trembling and like, this is it. This is doomsday.
Right. And that's the way it is. It's actually become sort of a pop Christian culture thing to do that.
Yeah.
Is to say, this is predicting these signs and these times, and you can point and see that, and here it is. And I think I used the illustration or the point that People look at the Bible, and particularly the book of Revelation, as like this giant puzzle that if we put it together, we can know the future.
Right.
And that is, I think, very poor way of doing it, and poor scholarship, and it ignores history, and it leads us away from really getting what the message of Revelation is. And so, that we kind of laid the foundation of that, and just to kind of give a little bit about the sermon.
Yeah.
I think, and we'll see more of him next week when we get into the first church, which is Ephesus. But Domitian was the emperor at this time. All the emperors throughout the first century, they all thought they were gods. And they each one kind of tweaked it and sort of upped the ante a little bit.
Yeah.
But when Domitian came around, he really thought that he was a god and should have been worshipped as a god. And so the people that were living in Ephesus, and really that whole region, that whole region he's writing to is sort of the gateway between the East and the West. The Roman Empire went all the way from England to India.
Right.
And so this place where Ephesus was in particular was a place where a lot of goods were brought to be sold and traded there. And that was their commerce. It was a world market, a huge world market called the Agora. And so people who worked there, in order to be able to sell or buy, you had to worship the emperor. You had to prove that it was emperor worship, that you worship Domitian at this time as a god.
Right.
And so the way that they had to prove that, you had to go down to this altar and offer incense, and then you would get a mark. And a lot of scholars, a lot of people think that it was probably some sort of like an ink stain or something on that. And so the early Christians at this time did not like that, of course, for obvious reasons.
Right.
They didn't really groove with that at all. So they had a way of calling Domitian, it's kind of like anybody that comes and claims to be God must be working out of the powers of the devil, which they called either the dragon or the beast. And so the question then is, will you take the mark of the beast? And so
Right.
that's sort of alluding to something that people hear a lot about the book of Revelation. And there are many, many, many insights that we can take from just understanding the culture and the time
Sure.
of what they were going through.
Yeah.
And it was difficult for them because Domitian was such a narcissistic and so, I mean, he was a bad guy, and that he would destroy complete groups of people if he saw them as being in opposition
Right.
to him. And so when the Christians refused to take this mark of the beast, then he said, well, we got to get rid of them. He was very furious about that and felt somewhat kind of like this group is a real threat to me. So they
put the bullseye right on him.
Put the bullseye right on
Yeah.
him. So the first thing he does to get rid of them is he separates their leader, who was John, and sends him off to exile in this island called the Isle of Patmos. And that's where John has this vision and writes this letter to the churches there,
Right.
the 7 churches in Revelation. Yeah.
It's so interesting to think or to hear this side of it, because honestly, I think I grew up in a world where Christianity kind of felt maybe harsh at times, where I think the churches I grew up around with would be primarily the ones who are like that kind of turn and burn style or whatever, and they always used Revelation as like this, you got to get ready, you got to get prepared.
You got to get ready. And, the whole point of your Christian life is to get ready for the rapture, which we'll be talking a lot about too.
Exactly.
And heads up, rapture is not in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
It's debatable whether it's in the Bible at all.
Right.
But it's certainly not. But they,
but like Left Behind was popping off there, like all these things of
right.
like, this is what's coming. And it was like, you got to be right now with everything, which there's definitely parts of that, but I think hearing this more historical side of things and comparing with that, you're like, okay, like there's just so many. I don't know. I think this is why it's good when we talk about Revelation,
Right.
is because there's so many different versions of what it could be.
Well, the Left Behind series and
Yeah.
a lot of what I would call common popular Christianity.
Yeah.
And what, as I said, was like I gave an example of some extreme groups who have like predicted the end of the world.
Yeah.
Probably most notably in your lifetime, in my lifetime, was this guy named Robert Camping. I can't remember his first name, but Camping, who was a radio preacher who predicted 3 different times at least that Jesus was going to return on a certain date.
Was he the guy who was like, the Mayan calendar's ending? This is
right.
When it was happening?
He figured it out.
Yeah.
And and then like when it didn't happen, he's going like, my math was wrong.
Yeah.
And so he had
That's
to come
coincidence.
back. So that's been, that may be on the fringes, but it's just there. It's at least a lot of people's theology of what they believe Revelation about is at least adjacent to this idea that it's somehow predicting the future and the end of time.
Right.
And, and completely ignoring the context and the history and, the language that John was using. And so had you heard anything about the eclipse? I mentioned the eclipse.
Yeah. There's definitely, you were talking about social media. There's definitely this social media trend of like bad things are going to happen. And it's like, no, that's not.
Yeah. It is.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
It's interesting. You're not. It's interesting. I'll get to it in a while, but it's interesting. I first saw it like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I sort of put it in my file. It's like, this would be an extreme example of that. And then I came to church today and was actually talking to Juan, and he was talking about it because he's seen it. And so, as the eclipse has gotten closer, more and more people are freaking out.
Yeah.
It's based on this idea that, using all the numbers. It was 7 years ago, there was another eclipse that went over these 7 particular cities, and now there's 7 other cities and all of this stuff. And here's the thing. It's so centered on America.
Yeah.
Because the eclipse happens every 18 months somewhere, but every time something like that happens, people freak out.
Yeah.
And it's been that way for all time.
Right.
And I will say the book The Left Behind, which is fictional, it was very American centered. And I've been doing some reading on it, and it actually shows up in 2 of the books I've already read about Revelation.
Yeah.
Talking about that series is that like that book doesn't play well in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a phenomenon here, but that idea, and I'll just go ahead and throw out the word of the theology, is dispensationalism. And dispensationalism.
That's a big Scrabble
Well,
word.
what they say is there's 7 churches, and
Yeah.
the 7 churches, each one of them represented a historical time in the church, and we're on the last one now.
Yeah.
So that's it in a very brief nutshell. I will touch on it, particularly on Wednesday night Bible study, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's so prevalent, it's so out there in pop Christianity that it touches just about everybody, and I think in more of a mainstream church like ours, the tendency is to say, well, that's weird, scary stuff that I don't particularly understand, so I'm not going to study it very much.
Yeah.
And so we use a few pet verses that we've got from Revelation, but don't really dig into the details of it, which is what I'm really hoping to do over the next 7 weeks. Some on Sunday morning, a lot on Wednesday night.
Right.
Because it is just like if you had like a guide to American Pie, like, well, when he's talking about, the jester sang for the king and queen, he's talking about Bob Dylan. Once you get that, you can begin to say, hey, this is a really hopeful, encouraging book. And yeah, he uses this battle, which is sort of like the cosmic battle of good versus evil.
Right.
And what does that sound like? I mean, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Marvel,
Star Wars.
Yeah. It's all this. There is this cosmic battle, and has a lot of religious language for sure. But he's talking about God on the throne. Well, the throne was a really big thing to Domitian. He's talking about there's so much that I'm excited about bringing out about it, and we say that's what that means. Just like the mark. I got several people come to the church like, I never knew what the mark of the beast was. Well, that is from history what it is.
Yeah.
And what it was referring to, and the people there, he talks about Babylon a lot in it. Babylon was Rome.
Yeah.
Babylon was a Jewish trope for any evil empire like that. It had been for a long time. It's throughout the Old Testament.
Right.
They used the word Babylon. So they understood who Rome was, who Babylon was. Babylon was Rome.
Yeah.
And so they understood who Beast was. The Beast was Domitian. So they understood all that. And so, one of the things, and I haven't read this actually written down somewhere, but it's just something I've drawn from my reading, is that when the Bible was coming together and being canonized, it took years. Yeah. There were some books that were there, and there was some debate over like some of the Gospels that haven't been there, and some of them have ended up like in the Catholic Church in the Apocrypha that the Protestant Church hasn't accepted. One of those that never was Revelation. Revelation, almost from the very beginning, was canonized, and Martin Luther didn't like it very much, and we'll get into that as well. A lot of stuff we're going to be getting into. But at the time, people understood what it was about.
Right.
And so that's why it was like, oh, wow, this is, it's a different language style and that sort of thing. But they got what it was about. It's only really recently, like in the last century or two, that we've had this whole other wave of things that have, been said about Revelation and how to use it. And, people just go nuts with it all. And it shouldn't be scary.
Yeah.
It should be encouraging and hopeful. And so that's what I hope people get out of it.
I hope so too. And I think I'm glad that you started talking about the Bible study too, because it's kind of that extra layer. Now I have a question real quick about the Bible study. Is it drop in? Like it's not one of those that it's going to build on each other. It
is a drop in.
Okay.
And I do think we'll probably video it because I've had a number of people, and some of the people that teach in the Wednesday night program who can't be there, they're really interested. I've got, another couple are going out of town for a couple of weeks.
Sure.
So I think we'll have, some rudimentary that. And the materials that I'm going to give out at that study, I think I'll probably make them available for everybody. Yeah. I ran across one thing which I will borrow from one of the authors, but he actually has a playbill for the book of Revelation.
Oh, cute.
Because, once you get that, and he has like Team God and Team Satan, and here are the characters in there. And really, if you have that in front of you as you're reading it, just like if you're reading The Lord of the Rings or something like that, I think it can really help you get into what those, characters are representing.
And I think that's actually super helpful because there's so many, I think sometimes the words feel like they kind of get minced, like the God on the throne. Are we talking about the real God? Are we talking about Domitius? You know what I mean? So to be able to kind of have some.
Well, there's a woman in there who kind of morphs throughout it. At one time, she's Mary, the mother of Jesus. At one time, she is Israel. Yeah. And so, it can be confusing. And just like it may be kind of a weird reference, but like I've learned a lot from reading these books. I've had this belief about Revelation for a while, but kind of going deep into it, I've learned so much. Just like I thought I knew what American Pie was about. Yeah. And then I watched this documentary and found out that when he says I was a lonely teenage bronchial buck, he was talking about he had bronchial asthma when he was a child and a teenager, and he got left out of a lot of things. Yeah. And so, it seeing that insight and being able to make those touch points, I think can help us, get into the books. And some of it's going to be mystery. Yeah. For sure. Because it was written a long time ago, and who knows? There's a lot of weird language in there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and people have different interpretations of that. So I'm glad we're talking about it. I feel like, especially, I've probably been a Christian about 22, 23, 24 years, somewhere in that range, and I feel like there's always been this. Let's just not talk about Revelations. Let's we can understand the rest of it, but everybody kind of skips this part for some reason. And I've never really understood why along the way. But especially when I was younger, I was just like, okay, whatever. We'll kind of skip around. But I think it's important to kind of just build off of it.
I've had a couple of people because of what's happening right now. Yeah. I mean, we got wars going on right now. We've got stuff happening in Israel. There's always stuff happening in Israel.
Always, yeah.
But And so that's really, I think, elevated a lot of people's, interpretations and concerns, and preachers and TV preachers and stuff are out there saying stuff. So it mentioned to me a couple of times about doing a series on Revelation. And I was like, I don't know, because you can't do it in one session.
No.
It takes a while. And so I think actually this series that we did on Witness at the Cross, which ended up being 6 or 7 weeks, gave myself, I kind of felt like I had permission to do a longer series.
Sure.
Because you may have noticed I try to do one series a month.
Yeah.
And I knew I couldn't get it in that amount of time.
Right.
And then also when I started doing the Wednesday night study, I was going like, hey, for people who really want to go into more detail, I've got this opportunity as well.
Right.
And so, some things had to happen for me to be willing to tackle it and take it on. But I'm happy to, and I'm actually pretty motivated about doing it as well. So
it can tell. It tells. So, well, we know this is kind of the scratching the surface sermon. This was kind of setting up more about what we'll be diving really deeper into in the coming weeks.
Yeah. I do think, and that's the other thing about sermons is I want people to just be able to show up on a random Sunday and not had to have been here the week before.
Right.
There could be some stuff that is definitely going to be very helpful that you've heard.
Right.
And I will try to do some repeating of it, but like if people haven't watched last week's sermon or today's sermon, which when you're watching this will be last week, I do think it is a good foundation, because in that I do talk about some assumptions that I am making about the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to know where I'm coming from and the perspective that I have, because it lays the foundation for where we're going.
Right. Yeah. And I think the nice thing also is that there's going to be several different avenues at which you can kind of continue to be a part of. If you can't make service, but you can make the Wednesday, there's going to be a lot of ways to kind of
Plus,
build
we have
off
this
of it.
wonderful thing called streaming.
Yeah.
And
shout out production team. For making these things available. So, we're going to be recording these podcasts weekly as part of it, all that good stuff. So tune in. It's going to be a great time to just dive through this book and to kind of talk through it together. And I would encourage you to talk about it with the people around you. Talk about it, not just a means to get them here or whatever, but as part of Bible study, part of the beauty of learning is when you can share that with other people and talk through things together and kind of work through some of these things. I think that's part of why we're meant to be in community. So if you can make the Bible study, great. If you can't, go out to lunch with a few friends and talk through it. Have it be part of your talking points as you're talking about the championship games and stuff like that. Make it part of what you're talking about. But you know where to find the material. It's going to be online. It's going to be on the Facebook, the YouTube, all that stuff. We'd love to have some conversation in the chats and all that. But ultimately, we just want to walk through this all together. And we're excited that you're here watching and joining us. And hopefully you'll come join us at service as well. But Dave, is there anything you want to preview going into the next one?
I don't think so. Next week, we are going to be looking at Ephesus. It'll be on Ephesus and Domitian a lot. I'm going to talk a lot about Domitian and what he did, who he was, and some of the things that he did, because it factors as we get into the rest of Revelation, we begin to see things come alive. Oh, he's doing that because that's what Domitian did. The throne that I talked a little bit or alluded to, the scroll.
Yep.
So those are things that you see in Revelation, and if you don't understand it outside the context of Domitian, you could think it was something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in, checking us out this week, and without further ado, we'll catch you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.